Hello and welcome back to the Measure Pod. Matthew, second episode. How are you feeling?
No, yeah, I enjoyed it. I'm enjoying the prep that goes into these talks as well, like forcing me to get out and look around at the industry and the news, etc. Because I suppose it's worth saying that we originally had a guest that had to unfortunately pull out last minute, so we're going it alone, Dara and I today.
We quickly scrambled and scoured the internet for news. And I shouldn't say we. I'll just be honest. I'll put my hands up. I've done absolutely no prep, and you've done all the prep. But I expect at least half the credit.
Yeah, that's fair enough. It's a co-host. It's not Coco host.
Exactly. But yeah, so the reason why we'll do a little, we might not always do this, but let's do a little kind of bit around, what we've been up to. So I'll start and explain why. I'm going to get my disclaimer out of the way and explain why I've done nothing and been really lazy and not put the work in to prepare for this one. Lazy is definitely not true actually, because I'm packing and clearing because we're moving house. And as with pretty much everything in life, I tend to underestimate it. And I underestimate the task and I overestimate my own abilities and my own organizational skills. I've been offline and doing, I mean, I call it real work.
Real work,
Yeah,
manual.
real manual work. Yeah, yeah. Although really, it's kind of clearing and packing and moving, and doing lots of trips in a van, moving stuff around,
Clearing your own mess.
clearing our own mess. Exactly. Yeah. So that's left me a little bit on the back foot, which is why I leaned on you. But I trust you. I knew you'd go away and you'd do loads of homework. So I have complete confidence in you that you'll help to pull this episode together.
We'll see, won't we? I think I did for a moment consider just making it completely about snooker because I think having any sort of podcast during the World Championships is hard not to be snooker related. But I did go and find some data related things.
Well, we are both snooker fans, so I think maybe we need to at least, and we're also data people, so I think we need to put this out there that if people would rather this became a snooker podcast, then make sure you let us know and we'll count up the votes. And if the people speak, then we'll just switch to snooker.
Next episode will be probably shortly after the the World Championships wraps up. So why don't we commit to pulling some snooker data and do some snooker analysis that we can talk about on that podcast. I commit, by which commit I mean we completely forget about it as soon as this is over and never do it. But
Well, I was thinking you, like, as it's becoming a thing, you could do it, and then I could just take credit for it.
we'll see.
Yeah. Okay. So what have you been up to then? Have you been up to any? Have you been moving and packing boxes?
No, I've been very much stationary, sitting, enjoying the sun a little bit, and yeah, genuinely watching a fair amount of snooker in my evenings. That's pretty much as exciting as it's got for me.
So has this recording interrupted? Have you basically got the snooker on in the background?
I haven't actually today. I haven't watched any, even though there's some good matches on today. I've not watched any because I've been in meetings. And
Ugh.
some people don't like it when you can hear snooker in the background and you're continuously looking off screen.
People are too fussy, aren't they?
I know.
Okay, so we're going to cover some news, and then we have a bit of a topic. I don't know why I say a bit of a topic. We have a topic that we're gonna cover, but we'll get to that. No spoilers. But yeah, we could do a quick run through some news. And I mentioned, I should say as well, I mentioned last time in our first episode together, that we were going to kind of tweak the format a little bit as we go. And I think this is probably proving that we're going to kind of mess around a little bit with the upfront sections of the podcast. We're going to have a few different sections around news, or if there's anything happening in the industry, we're going to cover that, and then usually we'll follow that up with a topic. But you might expect to hear a couple of changes as we fine tune that over the next couple of episodes. Okay, so news. What have you found? What have we found, Matthew? Collectively, you and I. What have we found?
I've found a few bits. I've tried to kind of relate each of them to marketing analytics in some way to kind of keep it on topic,
Shoehorn.
to shoehorn it in, because there's a real the problem at the minute with news in any industry is it seems to be that the AI dial is turned up to 11, so there is a continuous stream of AI news and oftentimes quite big things. So it's very difficult not to just talk about AI all the time. So I've tried to spread the gamut a little bit, but at the same time, for example, news about GA4 is pretty light. There's not much happening there in terms of new features and things like that. So we'll see. I've tried my best. So
It's AI. I always thought it was A1.
that's a steak sauce.
Mm.
Yeah. So the first one I pulled out is ChatGPT. So straight away, AI, ChatGPT shopping. I don't know if you saw that they've released a load of new features that hooks it up. I think I might be wrong, but I think they've sort of collaborated a little bit with Shopify, and you have much more detailed searches for shopping, and it returns products back into the ChatGPT interface, and you can kind of have a much more streamlined journey and go and purchase things and everything from there. And the reason I thought that was interesting, other than it clearly is, um, was that it seems extremely relevant to e-commerce. It feels like a pretty significant shift potentially in the way people are going to begin shopping. And what the hell does that mean in terms of tracking all of that and understanding those journeys?
Optimization as well.
Optimization, yeah. So like, is there a new term for search engine optimization? Is there a chat LLM optimization?
I feel like I did see something, but it was obviously not very memorable because I can't remember. But I'm sure there is some kind of SEO for, like whatever the equivalent is, but I can't remember
Oh
it.
yeah. 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 So I just thought that was interesting. It's another example of, I don't know, just people. You can imagine people interacting with the internet in a fundamentally different way, and potentially not leaving these chat interfaces. We kind of talked about it a little bit last week with like conversational analytics. Um, uh, a bit maybe did a different paradigm to traditional dashboard, general use dashboarding, but I just thought that was a pretty significant change.
It is significant, and it is all these ramifications that we don't fully know about or understand yet. Like even like just in general, as people's searching behavior or fact finding or whatever it is that people used to go to a website for, that's going to happen less and less. So, one thing is the optimizing part of it. Maybe I'm completely wrong here, but in my head, the optimizing part's one thing, and there might be ways to make your information more optimized. But there's nothing you can do to track people searching for you if that's all happening within if that's not happening on your property, then there's not going to be any way to actually track. Unless the AI providers start to give out tools, things like search trends, there might be the equivalent of that for ChatGPT or Gemini or whatever. But otherwise, if people start to move more and more into using the interface of an AI platform for everything, like shopping and all of their browsing, all of their researching, then that's scary for, companies in terms of the reduction in the amount of data that might be available to know what people are looking for and what people are doing.
I suppose it's kind of the opposite to search bots in a way, that you've wanted a no index to say, like, I don't want to include all these search bots in my traffic and understand like Google's crawling my site and messing with my metrics. Whereas if the example that comes to my mind is recently we've got quite a lot of content that we've created at Measure Lab around data form, and as such, Google's documentation of data form is pretty thin on the ground, and we rank quite highly for that kind of content. And recently, I was messing around with ChatGPT deep research and asking it some data form questions, and loads of the sources that it pulled out were from Measure Lab. And in a way, I'm wondering, is it going and pulling that information on the fly, like it's doing its own Google search, it's going to the website, it's pulling the data out, in which case that you want that bot in your traffic to understand how that all feeds through into the end user experience.
Yeah, you do. Yeah, you want to know that it's happened, but I guess I mean, you take that because it's better than nothing, but you're not going to know much about the actual user behind that. But then I guess maybe that's not that different to using a search engine.
No, well, smarter brains than us are figuring it out. I'm sure it'll be fine.
Yeah, yeah, it will. Did you say, just on the detail of it, did you say that you can actually complete a surely you can't complete a purchase yet, or can you?
I don't know if you can complete it within the interface, but I know it's surfacing, and I might be wrong on that. Maybe I should have read further into this before I started spouting about it. But I know that I don't know if all of this is generally available yet. I think some of it was like you tend to do it in pro users and then release it down to general users slowly. But I know it was much more so you could saw like a tabular interface of products being surfaced within the chat box, and being able to click through and look at those products. I'm not completely sure if you can then complete the purchase within there. I would assume it would send you off to their payment gateway or to the product page. But
Yeah, because you would have to go through, but eventually, it's unlikely that they're going to have a payment gateway set up to work with ChatGPT, but that'll happen. It is only a matter of time.
maybe it already has, and we're just talking like it hasn't. I don't know.
Yeah, maybe we should probably put a disclaimer on our news to say some of this news may not be true.
But yeah, this is yeah we've skimmed it.
Yeah, it's kind
We'll
of
talk about it like we know what we're talking about.
yeah, it's kind of pinch of salt news. It's not, it's not the news. It's just stuff that could be news.
Yeah, I think one thing I would like is to really make this more of a shock jock type podcast with sound bites and jingles. So maybe pinch of salt news and some sort of jingle Will can knock up.
Yeah.
Will be in the producer of the podcast. Yeah. Anyway, let's move on because we clearly don't know what we're talking about in that bit. There's a couple of things that have come out for the people who listen to the last podcast where Dara and I talked through all of the updates in that were announced at Next 25. A lot of it was coming soon with a dot dot dot. But a few things have started to trickle through into BigQuery now. We have been playing with them at Measure Lab. In fact, we had a call this morning where we were sort of all sharing and walking through some of the new things. So Canvas Assistant, which I think is the one you were quite taken by, if I remember correctly, Dara. We're playing with that this morning. So that's within BigQuery inside of Canvas. You can kind of just use natural language and it'll start creating different nodes of analysis and visualizations and things like that, which I think is really interesting to anyone who's got data in BigQuery because it's making that data just a little bit more accessible. Again, with that comes risks, obviously, which I think is kind of our topic for later. A little bit what you do to prepare for those risks, but yeah, it looked really interesting and like it was really making all that data even more accessible within BigQuery.
Yeah, I'm glad that one's out. That was the one one of the ones that I was keen on. And I guess the little test I want to run is like, how effectively can I use that? Because I think I'd be a good benchmark for, somebody who has some level of understanding. I wouldn't be going in there completely not knowing what I'm doing, but at the same time, I think I would be a good target user for that because I could lean on the assistant bits of it to do some of the heavy lifting, but I'd probably know, I'd know what to ask it and hopefully have some idea of how to sense check what comes back. So I'm kind of keen to play around with that and see what I think of it.
What I would recommend to anyone who does want to play with it is definitely do have a play with it. But what you could potentially do is create a data set and just put some smaller couple of days worth of data in there that isn't as large, and just interrogate that and play with that and get used to the features of it. Obviously, don't point it at anything raw because if you're letting it just go off and start spinning off and doing things, and it's just pointing at I don't know 3-year-old data set with billions of rows in it, you could end up with a bit of a hefty bill. So that's a good approach, is to just ring fence some data for exploration. I think that's what we're going to do internally. It's going to get a couple of days of data and just get everyone to be able to go and have a play and see what it can do.
Yeah, no, good advice.
And really cool in terms of telling a data story, I think as well. We've played in the past with notebooks, like Python notebooks, being able to tell analysis stories for clients, because you can have that plain text element and visualizations and kind of disperse that amongst the bits of Python code that are doing the transformations. I think this is an even more accessible way of doing that, with just this very visual interface of seeing a journey of transformation and visualization and explanation, and be able to just share that canvas with somebody so they can understand. what you're talking about and how you got to that conclusion is pretty cool.
So what's the difference? Is there a difference? Maybe there isn't between um, using Colab and using Canvas in BigQuery. They're similar at least, right? Are they the same or?
Canvas is built on top of Python notebooks. So obviously Colab is a Python notebook. I think it sits primarily on top of BigQuery notebooks, which is the hosted version of Python notebooks that exists within BigQuery. So you can actually build out your data canvas, and then at the top you can convert it to a notebook, and it will take that and drop it into a notebook, and you carry on from there. So even if you're a bit more of an experienced analyst with Python skills, you can maybe start there just to sort of work your way through and pull at a few threads. And then once you've found something of interest, convert it over to a Python notebook and pick up where you left off and carry on doing some more deeper analysis.
Okay, nice.
So discovery and catalog cloud storage data. I don't think I need to say any more about that. That's
Obvious. Does what it says on the tin.
what this is. So that there's a few. One thing that's happening with BigQuery, which we kind of alluded to last week, is it just seems to be hoovering up various other data services around Google Cloud into itself. It's kind of eating everything and bringing it under the BigQuery banner. And there's various services around governance and data cataloging and things like that that have existed in, say, Dataplex or Data Catalog and these other services that are now starting to appear. One of them is this discovery catalog for cloud storage, which is essentially all that means is it is looking in like cloud storage buckets and being able to pull out metadata and understand the schemas and things of that structured and unstructured data that's sitting in your cloud storage bucket and allow you to interrogate it in BigQuery pretty much straight away. So for say somebody who may not have loads of data engineering resource in the company and things like that, it can really increase their ability just to interrogate that raw data and just start to play with it and speed up the time to be able to explore the data, and it can reduce that technical friction down quite a lot. Not played with it a huge amount, but it looks interesting. Maybe a precursor to that multimodal table thing we talked about last week as
Yeah.
well.
Yeah.
Having all of that in one place.
I'm going to ask you questions about this, even though you just said you haven't had a chance to play around. I'm going to,
I'll make
I'm going to assume you know this inside out. Um, I'm trying to get my head around, like I get it. Like I kind of get it on one level. So if you've got a bunch of data sitting in cloud storage rather than in nice, neat BigQuery tables, you can use this to go off and firstly, it'll just go off and scan what's there and it'll tell you what's structured and what's unstructured and all the rest of it. But what can you actually do something with that then? Or is it like, I'm trying to think how to phrase my question is like, is it kind of like an audit tool? Or is it actually something that you can use? Can you actually run queries through it?
Yeah. Yeah, I believe you can. It's creating big tables, big lake tables. And yeah, you can query them once it's kind of cataloged the data that's sitting within cloud storage. I believe the theory is you can query it from within BigQuery. So that's kind of what I'm getting at when I say that it removes down that friction of being able to just interrogate that data. So you can imagine you've got a lot of, I don't know, CSV files or Parquet files or whatever else sitting in Cloud Store, and you just want to interact with it from BigQuery and not have to worry about how do I get that, ingest that data with data transfer service and match up the schema and this, that, and the other. You can just start poking at it.
There'll be a, maybe this is a stupid, there's no stupid questions.
Right.
But maybe, but maybe this is maybe I'm not understanding it by asking this question, but why would you bother then putting the data into BigQuery if you can just access, and I don't mean for any, like obviously there would be reasons to have some data in there, but would this actually create an argument for leaving some of your data it just in cloud storage and not actually having it in BigQuery in the first place?
Um, I don't know. I guess I can think of a couple of examples of potentially where you would want to get it into if it's going to be something that's more piped in and regular and sort of updated on a daily basis. you want to be bringing that into BigQuery because you then want to take that data and model it and combine it with other data and get other outputs. Potentially, it sitting in Cloud Store in the first instance would allow you to start interrogating and joining and playing with that data before you begin building out pipelines and pulling the data in on a regular basis as one sort of use case. There's probably a ton more that I'm again. I mean, this is pinch of salt news, so the depth. I love it, but yeah, I think that's one example where it might just be easier just to begin to play with it without having to go into the worries of building out infrastructure or importing it into BigQuery before you're ready to.
Maybe the type of content, because again, thinking of you mentioned about like the multimodal point that we talked about last week. And like, if you start, I asked a question last week around like, is there going to be more of an incentive for companies to start putting more of their data? So not just the data we typically think of in terms of what sits in BigQuery, but like even things like assets. So like images and video files and PDFs and whatever. And you mentioned CSVs as well. So like, I guess it could be like a bit of a dumping ground. Is going to make it sound really bad, but there could be a bit of a case of like, let's get all of our company data in there. It's not all going to be structured. It's not all going to be kind of used in regular reporting, but we might just stick everything in there. And then the stuff that doesn't need to be organized and put into BigQuery tables, it would give you a way, give you an interface to go and actually create this. Let's say you've got a whole bunch of, let's say you're a company, you've got a whole lot of older data in CSV files that you now have, an updated database or whatever, but you could just drop all those CSVs in and then run queries on them as opposed to trying to, gradually migrate them.
Right now, this is structured and semi-structured data. What they specifically call out is Parquet, Avro, ORC, JSON, and CSV. That's why I say maybe it's a precursor to those multimodal tables and being able to pull in the unstructured stuff, which I don't think that's been released yet. I haven't seen anything about it. But yeah, you're right. I think Big Lake, then pulling that into BigQuery and making it more accessible to that historical data could be really useful. Cool. Moving on, GA4. Try to grab some GA4 information, but primarily, we did talk a little bit about from time to time. When we're coming to the end of a month, maybe wrapping up changes and things that have happened within particular platforms. So, thought maybe I'd have a look at what new features have come online in GA4 over April. So this is April. This isn't in the last week. But the generated insights stuff came into GA4 this month. There's a lot of those similar features appearing throughout BigQuery and Looker Studio in conversational analytics, but it's on particular reports and data sets, having an LLM look through the data and try and pull out what it thinks are interesting trends and insights that it will surface to you within the UI.
This one got me thinking. I mean, this one isn't new. Well, this bit's new, which is on the detail pages, but the insights on the overview pages has been around for a while. And it's a bit hit and miss. Sometimes it picks up stuff that maybe you don't really need to care about. But it is a massive time saver because when I read the description on this one, it reminded me, this is a bit where I'm going to be, talk about the old days. But I used to do, this was a big part of the work is a client would have a problem. They'd say, oh, our conversion rates dropped year on year, or we've got, people having an issue getting through the checkout or whatever, one of these typical problems somebody would have. And the process was always the same. You'd go into GA, you'd narrow it down, you'd look at a bunch of dimensions and metrics, and you'd try and, through process of elimination, you might use segments as well, and you'd narrow it down to try and figure out what exactly was causing the problem. Sounds great, but in reality, that took forever because of sampling, especially if it was a bigger account, you'd load times. It was a pain, to actually answer that question. It could take you, depending on the size of the website and whatever else, it could take you hours to figure that out. And this just does that in the background and then pops it up with a little note saying, did you know that users from Paris who are in this age demographic, their conversion rates dropped on this date. And you just don't have to go in and do that anymore. And even just picking up things that maybe would have gone unnoticed before as well. So I remember when this came out, it was kind of scoffed at a little bit of like, oh, the suggestions are a bit rubbish or whatever. But I think as it improves, this is going to save a huge amount of time where you would have had to manually go through that process in the past.
Which is what you hope AI is going to do for us is like remove the tedious and leave behind the deep to a certain extent. Because this is like to be specific, I'm just looking at the announcement. This was from the 2nd of April. It's specifically that it's specifically that it's generating insights are now shown directly within detailed reports in Google Analytics. So I don't know if they were. I know I have seen them elsewhere, and I know almost at the very beginning of GA4 there was like in the drop down you could ask sort of simple questions and it would try and pull the relevant data. But I think these are more it taking an active role in trying to pull out insights, and it's useful like we were talking about with Canvas earlier, and generally across BigQuery, they've peppered in these little LLM pieces. So within any table within BigQuery, there is a generate insights section, and it will do exactly the same thing. It'll look at that data set and it will try to suggest a list of questions you could ask of that data, and then get it to run queries to return the data that answers those questions. And it's just helping just to jump to something that you can then begin to interrogate and confirm and dig into. Reports, snapshot templates.
I think these features are useful for certain users of GA. It's like anything that kind of customizes the interface and saves you having to go and deep dive anything. But I think you said you don't use it much at all. I don't these days, but I used to. Although it wasn't called GA4 then, it was universal. But you want to go in a deep dive. You don't want one of these prepackaged kind of snapshots or reports. But that's basically what this is. It's just for, I guess, more users who just want a higher level view and they just want to go in and get some of the basic metrics without having to go and dig around and find them. So I get it. It's useful for some people. It's not something that I think probably many people, even people who listen to this podcast, probably wouldn't be particularly wowed by that feature. So yeah, onwards.
Yeah, and tell it. Maybe you're shouting at your wireless again. I'm gonna stick with wireless. But yeah, let us know if we're talking nonsense and it's a feature that you absolutely love. Um, and the other thing I had was around not Claude Code, sorry, Cloud Code. So Cloud Code is a Visual Studio Code extension. Visual Studio Code being like an IDE that you can use on your local machine. But what they've done to Cloud Code is a Google released extension that interacts with Google Cloud in loads of different ways. They've added tons of BigQuery features. So essentially you can develop and work with and interrogate and manipulate tables and data sets and query data and everything all from your local machine now, with not having to do it directly within the BigQuery UI. That might be beyond the pale for some people. It might be, they're not necessarily used to that world of living in the IDE, but certainly, for example, with Dataform, I found that working with the Dataform data locally in an IDE and using the extensions that are built around that add loads of quality of life things that maybe Google doesn't include, like auto completion and split windows and all these different bits. I think both of those things I just mentioned, Google does have in the UI. So they were terrible examples, but trust me, there's interesting things you could do with it, and it allows you to quickly and easily move things around, back stuff up in GitHub, and all the good things that come with sort of working in a software engineering type way with this type of stuff. So I haven't played, again, there's a theme. I haven't played with it yet because I only it only got announced earlier today, but I certainly will be. I think I'll be adopting that pretty heavily into my practice.
Yes, maybe I shouldn't be so impressed by this. Maybe this is what we should just expect. But it does seem like not just Google, but all of the kind of big tech companies. They seem to be fairly equally pushing out the developments on both the technical side, so with things like IDEs, but then also the less technical side where they're making it a lot more accessible. And it gives me a headache almost thinking about trying to tackle both of those two ends of the of the audience, in parallel. They're making it better for developers, but they're also making it better and easier for people who don't have the really hardcore technical skills.
Yeah, yeah, true. It's a good point.
I had a sneaky GA4 update. I say it's not sneaky. It just didn't. You obviously weren't very interested in it, so you just
It didn't make it into my really good JA4 section.
report snapshot. What were they even called? Report snapshots, overview snapshots. The aggregate identifiers came out as well in April, which is the solution to us. It's a solution to the problem that was happening with some misattribution of paid Google traffic being misattributed to organic. And I think one of the reasons that was causing it was if the user has I never remember the name of it, but the ad consent cookie, whatever that one's called, if they haven't given consent for that, then it wasn't passing through the information from the GCLID parameter, and it was therefore misattributing that traffic to organic. So they're using these aggregate identifiers now, which is a way for them to identify that it is Google paid search traffic. But it obviously still doesn't track anything it's not supposed to track. But, as opposed to it being tracked in the wrong bucket, at least it's being tracked as coming from the right traffic source now. So that's quite a big feature if you've been having headaches from this issue, which a lot of people will have been.
Yeah, so we thought would be to talk around how to make sure that your data is as robust as possible when it's sitting in BigQuery. So we talked last week about all of these new features that are making data within BigQuery more and more accessible. So what practical things can you be doing across that data lifecycle to make sure that it's as robust as it can be, that you're understanding when things are going wrong, that it's secure, that all of these boxes are ticked. We're not going to go into aching detail, but just to point out points where we think, practical things need to be thought about and actions taken.
My takeaway from last week was that you don't need to worry about any of that. Did I
Yeah, I mean,
Did I misunderstand?
there is that. You can certainly take that approach. That's called the ostrich tactic. And you just sort of bury your head in the sand and just plug away, and whatever numbers it spits out,
It's fine.
just
Yeah.
just present those.
But
Then
no,
have
no,
something.
but I obviously I'm joking, but it's kind of well, it's not even half true, but there's something in the joke in that Google and all the other kind of we talked largely on Google last week, obviously it was because of Next 25, but they have to do this, but they are making it look like everything just works perfectly. So there's going to be a lot of people out there who probably will just go away now and think, oh, this is great. Everything's automated. Everything uses AI. We can just press buttons and things will happen and it's all happy days. But you're absolutely right. It's not the case. And you did make that clear last week. Just because there's a lot of AI in BigQuery now doesn't mean that you can just trust that everything that's in there is going to be correct, because it's the whole garbage in, garbage out thing, isn't it?
Yeah, yeah, exactly. And that goes right the way at the very beginning from where the data is being generated, right the way through to those tools that we're describing that are essentially activation tools. So it seems sensible to start on that far left hand side in terms of generation. So to my mind, a really let's talk in the world and the cadence of marketing analytics, potentially like e-commerce and sites like that, to have a really well thought out and well structured data layer. So you understand all of the data that's coming out of it, it's documented, and you ensure that everything that is being tracked is correct and well designed and well thought out in the first instance, right at the very beginning.
So I feel like I might ask you this question to at every section of this. But so if you're an organization and you've got the right people to do all these different bits of the process, all well and good, and everyone talks to each other and collaborates, then great. That's often not the case. So whose role typically would it be to make sure that that's done? Or so if let's say you're new to the role in the company and you work in the marketing team and you want to make sure that you've got good data to use to inform your campaigns. You're worried that maybe the data layer isn't right or the right data is not being collected. I mean, when we go, in fact, I won't ask you this question now. As we go through this, let's maybe call out who would typically be responsible for that, and maybe, you know, who you might need to speak to as well. So it could be like, it might be a third party agency, or it could be another team, or it could be another person with a particular skill set, because this is one of the complications, isn't it? It's like, as this becomes more and more broad between, from collecting the data right the way through modeling and activation, the skill sets increase probably exponentially over time as well. So it might be just worth us kind of trying to highlight that as we go through this process as well, as much as we can.
Yeah, I think with that point, the data generators typically they're going to be your devs, the people who are putting the sites together and creating whatever logging or whatever events that are firing out of your site. So that's the most important third party that you're going to be interacting with when it comes to data layer specs and getting your preferred tracking set up. I think unfortunately, like you say, a lot of marketing teams currently don't have necessarily a data engineer or an implementation expert sitting on staff that's going to be able to just know off the top of the head how to set something like this up and run with it. So in that case, you may reach out to a third party Measure Lab, or somebody similar, some other consultancy or agency that can help design those things. But there is also, there's Google isn't great at documentation, but I think there's tons of resources out there now between, CMO's written on things on this, and there's loads of other, it's well trodden ground, the data layers, and GA4 data layers and e-commerce data layers and the things you need to include in them and the structure of things. So I think most people will be able to come to something and figure it out with enough reading and time put into it, or reach out to an expert.
I guess one thing that often doesn't happen though is that, because we find this, don't we, where sometimes these things are considered after the fact. And I think one universal piece of advice would be the people who are ultimately going to use the data and act on it need to have a conversation with whoever it is that's responsible for collecting that data, producing that data in the first place. Otherwise, you could have somebody who's very capable and knows how to track everything under the sun. But if they're not going to ultimately use the data, then there needs to be a marrying up of what is actually collected, what it means, and then how that data is going to be used by the people who are going to run campaigns or make changes in the website or whatever.
Absolutely. And I think the next point we're talking about a typical Google stack here. So I think a lot of the tracking and etc. and the tools that will be in the hands of the marketing team would exist within Google Tag Manager. So setting up your various pixels and Google Analytics tag tracking, and crucially, what I'm about to come on to in terms of consent, and understanding and ensuring that all of your consent and consent mode and all of these things are properly configured. Because if it isn't, and I'm not going to go into detail of how to do that, because that could be the subject of a podcast in of itself. But if your consent isn't configured correctly, that can be leading to all sorts of not just policy and GDPR and breach issues, but really fundamental tracking problems that may not be immediately obvious to you when the data is reaching GA4 and ultimately BigQuery. So ensuring that is all set up, it's robust, it's following the right updates and consent defaults and stages of which it's firing, it's really crucial as well.
Yeah, and again, on that point around collaboration, I guess we advise that people would check that, because there's obviously a legal component to that. So what's actually being gained in terms of consent and how the data is being used would involve making sure that that's okay from a legal standpoint, and any disclaimers that are made or cookie policies, that kind of thing. But then also the technical understanding of what that consent will do. So the status of that consent will do in terms of the data that ultimately is tracked and used. So again, there's probably multiple teams or multiple people that need to be involved in that step of the process as well.
And the other important thing to consider here is making sure that you have some sort of monitoring or some sort of way of understanding when something's gone wrong. So you've got tools like, for example, tracking plan, which can be a really useful way of something alerting you when something's changed or something's broken or some metric doesn't look right, and it can give you a poke in the ribs to say you need to come and investigate what's happened here. Equally, a relatively new GA4 feature. See, I do know some features that appear in GA4 is the annotations. I say it's a new feature. It's a feature that existed before in every other analytics platform ever, but GA4 have added it back in. So being able to understand key changes and things that have happened within a development life cycle. Maybe you've added a new pixel, maybe you've updated a tag, maybe you've implemented a new piece of consent tracking. Being able to see within your GA4 data when that something happened and be able to correlate those two things is going to be really important. Um, Ultimately, it's about maintaining trust that in the data once it reaches that source. So you're really happy and everyone's happy that the data is correct. And being able to point to reasons for changes is crucial as well.
Yeah, I think the monitoring is such a key point, because even if you've done a brilliant job of implementing everything in the first place, you just don't know when something's going to go wrong on the website that's out of your control, or there's going to be a change to, I don't know, some browser change even that affects traffic on the site. So anything like that is going to mess up your, the data that you eventually end up reporting on, or using to activate campaigns or whatever. Um, the documentation as well. I mean, I know people were crying out for annotations to go back into GA4. I wonder if you got any, like, what would you advise to in terms of keeping that documentation across everything? So, because obviously GA4 is not going to be your only data source typically. So would you suggest that people maybe use something like, I don't know, like a system like Confluence or something like that to keep track of the broader kind of history of what's gone wrong and what key dates and things like that?
Yeah, I think it all depends on what you have as an organization and how you like to document things. Part of the problem is when you have these big, all-encompassing documents, they tend to just sort of die on the vine and lose their use. So where you can pepper in automation, like for example, there's some really cool GitHub repos that people have created that will automatically add an annotation in GA4 when you publish a new version of GTM. So that's completely hands off, and it will just add a little annotation like something changed here, and you don't have to do anything. The more you can automate documentation and make it not have to be thought about, the better. But yeah, like you say, I think key additions of other data sources, understanding where these are placed and what data they're pulling in and all of that stuff, and having it available to people, metadata is really important. I think on the GA4 side as well, understanding the settings and the attribution settings and the modeling and all these sorts of things that are going on within that platform. It can be really easy to toggle on modeling data and not really understand that that's what you're doing, and you've got consent mode set up, and the data you're seeing within J4 may not actually be real numbers, which is maybe the future. Maybe that's just how analytics works now, but it can be very confusing, especially if you then got a raw output into BigQuery and it doesn't match up with GA4, and GA4 doesn't match up with another analytics platform you've got, and you're doing testing, you got to figure out why. So understanding those features and the admin of all of these things with enough depth to know what you're turning on and off is really useful.
And that's an area where governance, I guess, is really important, because it's one thing if people are querying data without really knowing exactly what they're looking at, but it's another if you have too many people who shouldn't have access to admin features on these tools, because you can go in and make changes that you don't fully understand the implications of. So having a tight control over who's actually able to make those kind of feature changes or setting changes is really key as well, isn't it?
Yeah, and I'm loath to a certain extent to recommend stringent access policies on things like GTM, because on one hand it kind of gave a bit more power to the marketing analytics and the marketing teams who historically were just locked out of making their own changes. But I think it is important to ring fence that and think about who has access and who's doing what, and working in workspaces and keeping things protected, and working in development and staging development and production environments to keep things ring fenced in that way, just to protect your data as much as you can. To that end, getting the data out, and again, I'm just going to stick with GA4 for now, but say getting that data out into BigQuery, all of these features. So right now we've got, we know our consents right, we know our data layer like the back of our hand. We've got everything well documented. We understand all the settings and things that are turned on and off in GA4. We are extracting the data out into BigQuery, building out from there reporting tables and trying to pull that data apart to answer the specific questions we want to answer, I think is really important as well. Combining that with other data sources that may also be within BigQuery, and not just pointing at and talking to raw tables, is going to save you a lot of money for one thing, but it's also going to make it much more useful for all of these new features that Google are stuffing into BigQuery. And unfortunately, well, I say unfortunately, that includes layering out your metadata and adding in column descriptions and making the data as rich as possible for people to understand what's in it and what it means to you as a company. Again, governance. But Google is automating a lot of that with upcoming features, with like automatic metadata generation um, and alike. That's going to make the LLMs and yourself and your staff members and anyone else in your organization understand what's actually in there, with a lot more confidence. What you'll find often is people, when it gets to a certain critical mass, people just keep pulling in the same data over and over again because they don't know what's already in there, and that ultimately leads to what I like to term the derelict data warehouse. But just something that's become a bloated mess. No one knows where anything is, so they just keep pulling more and more in, which ultimately is costing you a lot of money. And for all of these features that Google are adding in, probably produces 5 different answers to the same question because people are talking to different sources. Um,
Yeah, I was going to ask you about that, or kind of drill into that a bit more, because you've probably got like a few reasons for that to happen. You've got the discrepancies you might have between the source data in the source platform versus what you eventually end up using in your nice clean BigQuery tables. So, and even then, it might be different again when you get it back into some kind of BI tool, visualization tool, where you've maybe added filters and whatever. Never mind the fact that, as you said, you can also then, even in BigQuery, have multiple copies of the same table. So what's the, this is there's probably no simple answer to this, but what would you suggest is the right approach there in terms of like making sure that people aren't all looking at different versions of the same, slightly different versions of the same data?
yeah, I think governance again, making sure that what's in there is well documented, labeled, metadata's created. One aspect that I guess we can jump to now, which was going to be my next point, is around access levels and security, and make just sort of having an idea of who needs access to what, where does that live, putting that into different data sets with different accesses so people can go in there and work in there and query that data. It's tricky to have a really overly strong arm of centralized governance now, I think, because it it's slow and can be a bit of a bottleneck, particularly at the speed of everything's moving. So I think it's going to be perfectly reasonable in my mind for organizations to have more federated teams that are working on their own sources of data, potentially that spring off of a centralized data source, but they need to make sure they maintain the correct governance and make sure that everyone understands what data is already in there, and that people aren't able to just keep adding in new data willy-nilly and we get in different access and different questions. So yeah, documentation, access limitations, clearly labeled.
Yeah, I think that's all you can do, isn't it? Because it's hard. Because you, on the one hand, you want to make the data accessible and the different tools accessible, but you can't just have it be a free for all either. So you do, I guess, yeah, governance is a whole, it's a whole topic on its own. So I think what you said there, it sums it up as a kind of general view.
And I think also, and this goes right way from the left again, but and again, I guess it comes down to governance, but having joined up understanding of things like naming conventions and ways of labeling that are certainly team wide, but hopefully company wide, so that people can understand what's in that data. Because even it it could be easy to label some column this underscore one and then have a really a bit of a crap description in there. And that may be exactly what people are after. That may be the piece of data that they really need, but they're just going to go and try and answer the question again and go through a whole lengthy process of pulling the data in and exploring and then analyzing. And the same goes in GTM. You see some really big like tag manager containers that are full of 20 different naming conventions that it's almost impossible to find if somebody has already sort of set up a piece of tracking you can just glob onto and adapt to your own ends. Um, so understanding your language as a company in those terms is going to be really useful. Not to mention that it also makes the better naming conventions. It's going to make it more useful for LLMs as well. And then those features.
And like, I guess with any individual part of this process or journey or whatever we're calling it, you would want to do periodic audits of each one anyway, wouldn't you? So with things like naming convention, because best of intentions, these things tend to slip over time because different people work on different things, and you know, things shift away from. They might start out nice and consistent, and then they'll gradually just drift off. So you know, whether it's done every 6 months or once a year or whatever, looking at each aspect of this and actually checking that everything is still consistent, getting rid of any duplication, getting rid of any old tables or tracking or whatever it is, old reports, could be anything. If things aren't being used, then they're just taking up space, aren't they? So just going through and doing a good spring clean every now and again and getting rid of some of the old stuff that's just making things confusing.
But yeah, you're right. I think there's a lot of features, especially when you've got the data into Google Cloud. There's tons of features around monitoring that you could be setting up to ensure people aren't everything from ensure people aren't querying too big a data set, but you could also get as granular probably as being alerted when people are setting up new tables, being alerted when potentially something doesn't fit a particular naming convention you want to adhere to, and you can build out dashboards within Google Cloud Monitoring that look at when tables are updated, how long ago they were updated. Has that just been sat there and not doing anything for however long? That even has graphs of like the number of tables that are being created on a daily basis. You can see how that's going. So being aware of that, setting up alerts to your email. If you're really desperate to be interrupted on a Sunday afternoon, you can get it sent to your WhatsApp, I believe. So deploying techniques like that are really useful as well.
And the AI assistants, you know, are going to become more and more used for this as well. Like, you know, where they're going to tell you they found these inconsistencies in whether it's naming conventions or you know, we suspect this table is duplicate or whatever. It's going to get easier and easier as long as people don't do that thing where if it's too trigger happy and then you just ignore everything. It tells you it needs to be pitched just at the right level to say, you know, there's something that's not consistent here, or there's something that looks like it's redundant that you could consider getting rid of. But you can become blind to that if it's triggering, especially if you get it on a WhatsApp I think I'd be throwing my phone out the window if I started getting WhatsApp messages about BigQuery tables.
Yeah, and I'm guilty of that. I set one up for our website a while ago when I was trying to gauge what size of server side GTM container we need. So I set an alert up to tell me if there hadn't been traffic for a certain amount of time. And luckily it gets just on my emails, not going to a text, but it's like 3 times a day. Like, you haven't had traffic in 20 minutes. I don't care. I need to turn that off. But yeah, so all those things. The thing to think about in terms of security as well, from a people perspective, is the principles of least privilege, and that goes for people, that goes for service accounts, that goes for anything that's accessing the data. So that is, give anyone only the access they need in order to perform whatever role, whatever piece of analysis, whatever the application may need to perform its function, because anything wider than that is a security concern. And could cause problems.
Yeah, and it's always better to give less access and have the people who really need more come and give you a case for why, as opposed to, just blanketly giving out too much access to everyone. Like it's obvious, isn't it? I say it's obvious,
Yeah.
and see it, in
It's
practice.
tempting.
Yeah.
It's very tempting because sometimes I often describe it as permissions whack-a-mole. It can feel like you, particularly when you're working with new cloud projects, often you get these accesses and then it's like, oh no, I also need this very obscure access, and like knock that one down, and then it highlights another access you need. You knock that one down, and it can be quite a bit of back and forth. And the temptation is to just go, I'm just going to
Grant
make
the
you
whole
editor.
thing. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Um, and maybe that can be okay if for somebody working within a company just to get things set up in a first instance, as long as they have one eye on rolling that back to what is needed
And
down the line.
that's often the challenge, isn't it? It's like, oh, if I just give you edit access now and I'll take it away once you're done, but someone's got to actually remember to do that. So again, I guess these where
Audits.
audits, yeah, yeah.
Yeah, and the same goes for GTM, auditing accesses, auditing the tags. Same goes for GA4, auditing access. I mean, I would challenge anybody listening to this now to go and look at, say, their GA4 user accounts, and tell me that everyone still works at their organization, or they know that there's probably about 10 agencies
Yeah,
that
yeah, at
still
least, yeah,
those
yeah.
accounts.
And you see also you see personal email addresses of people that left the company 2 years ago, and you just think this is, get that out of there now. It's crazy. So yeah, periodically check all these things, make sure they're still the way you expect them to be.
Yeah. And I guess the final one, and this is probably more slightly on the advanced end, but making things repeatable where you can. If you've got a medium sized team, then it's so easy for everyone to have four different ways of doing something, and for differences to begin to creep in. If you can automate things a touch, so maybe you've got a particular way you like to set up tag manager containers, take that out and be able to import that again as a template and a starting point. Similarly with Google Cloud, if you can leverage things like Terraform, which is like infrastructure as code, just to have a best practice way that already has your naming conventions baked in, your alerts, common alerting setup, and all of these kind of things that can just be deployed and set up and right from the off. And you can include things like granular permissions and stuff like that within that kind of tooling. It's just that it's not necessarily it's pretty code heavy. It's not too taxing, but it is code, Python code.
Does Terraform only work with BigQuery, or does it work with other tools as well?
Yeah, it works for pretty much any cloud provider, really. It's infrastructure as code. It's open source, but it's supported by Google, Amazon, all the other cloud providers. You can use it to just deploy infrastructure,
Okay, cool.
cloud infrastructure. Yeah. But yeah, I think that was not exhaustive. It was just more of a pointing out a few places along the journey where it may be things to consider and best practices to consider to make the most out of these tools. And like I said, we could have gone probably into podcast depth on any one of them, really.
And maybe we will. I think that was the aim for this one, wasn't it? What it is to give a bit of a kind of broad brush strokes, bit of a whistle stop kind of tour, and say, look, here are some of the things to look out for. But this could become a theme where we do actually dive a little bit deeper into, because I think we both felt when we were watching all the Next 25 talks that like Google do a very good job of saying, all of this is just taken care of. Everything works straight out of the box, which we know it doesn't. So I think data quality, making sure you know what's actually going into this in the first place is such an important theme. So we probably will end up diving a bit deeper, I'd say, on future, and maybe with some of the guests as well. It might be something that we, basically expect to hear us talk a lot about data quality, because it's so fundamental to all of this.
Yeah, and next time we talk about GA4 in any length, maybe we'll bring someone on who from Measure Lab that actually knows what they're talking about.
This is a pretty good point actually to mention something that we're going to try out. So if you've got a specific question a problem with some data that you're working with or something you just can't get your head around. Um, the name is to be confirmed. We're kind of toying with the idea of calling this like data agony aunt or something like that, but we might change our mind on that.
Yeah, because I wonder if as well, this is clearly invention on the fly between us here, but I'm also interested, like just general audience participation. If anybody's got some hot take or some thoughts on something, as well as like problems, if they just want to send it our way, and we may or may not talk about it, that would be cool. So I don't know if agony aunt necessarily works.
Yeah, you're right. Actually, let's not restrict it. I think if we mention something that you disagree with, we'd love to hear that. If you've got something you'd like us to talk about, then brilliant. But I think we're open to questions, feedback, whatever. And then, as you said, and I like this, we either will talk about it or we won't, depending on how we feel.
Yeah, this may be the last time you ever hear about this idea or segment of the podcast, and it just it disappears forever. Never talk to me.
I think if anything is going to spark feedback, it's going to be our pinch of salt news, where we just basically make things up every week.
That's stuck as well now, is it? Pinch of salt news is.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, that's a keeper. That's a keeper.
And to be fair, if anybody's reached this point with the podcast, they're probably the most likely people to send us to interact and send us some questions.
Okay, but I think for now, for today, that's probably a good point to draw to a conclusion.
Yeah, I think so. We've got, touch wood, quite a few cool guests lined up for some future episodes. So look forward to that.
That's it for this week's episode of the Measure Pod. We hope you enjoyed it and picked up something useful along the way. If you haven't already, make sure to subscribe on whatever platform you're listening on so you don't miss future episodes.
And if you're enjoying the show, we'd really appreciate it if you left us a quick review. It really helps more people discover the pod and keeps us motivated to bring back more. So thanks for listening, and we'll catch you next time.